I'd like to say that the causes are three things. Poor process, short-termism, and poor custodianship. And at the risk of personalizing this a little, I'd like to reference a thing which I wrote in 1978, which I call my management credo. There were 6 principles on this management credo, and 3 of them address the issues that I've just mentioned. Let me just read them briefly and then talk to them. The first one was called Process as a Priority, and it read as follows. The management process whereby growth and earnings are generated has priority over the amount of growth or earnings achieved. Impressive results can never be used to justify a management process that is conspiratorial, manipulative, or otherwise disrespectful of the rights of stakeholders. So, remembering that this was 1978, the word stakeholder wasn't that important in those days, but for the reasons that Bonang has just mentioned, this was always about stakeholders. And so, I'm at pains to say to my colleagues always that financial performance is always a lagging indicator. It's preceded by operational performance, which is preceded by human performance. And I think that our job as leaders is to understand the human performance that is taking place in an organization, and using well-structured processes to shape human performance starts to give us an ability to predict better governed organizations and ones that are less subject to some kind of white-collar crime. I think that that's exactly what King is. King is about process, and it's about enabling us to be more predictive in that regard. The second principle on here was called the long-term perspective of decision-making, and again I'll read it to you. It says, our decision-making when it involves issues that materially affect stakeholders is taken within the long-term context. The question we must ask is, how will this decision look to a corporate historian of the highest integrity, common sense, and humanity 5, 10, or 15 years from now? And I would suggest, ladies and gentlemen, that short-termism is one of the major causes of corporate malfeasance. There are just too many cases where people are chasing a short-term number, where you have demanding managers saying, deliver the bottom line or else, or deliver the bottom line at all costs. And the bottom line is often delivered at all costs because people down the line do not necessarily have an immovable North Star that they can follow, and they bend rules to achieve the result that has to be achieved. And so I believe that a key requirement of a leader is to make sure that you don't exert too much performance pressure on an organization, because that is a driver or can be a driver of corporate crime. And the third one was poor custodianship. And again, I'll read the last of the 6 of these principles, and I called it the rights of ownership. And I said, equity owners in a capitalistic economy have clear, inalienable rights at all times to exercise effective ownership over their own equity. Dilution of this fundamental right by management under any guise of virtue whatsoever irretrievably undermines our corporate integrity and will not be tolerated even in the smallest way. And again, how do you grant owners that inalienable right? Well, the first and obvious thing is through disclosure and transparency. And again, quoting from an annual report I wrote some years ago, I said, this annual report reflects our dedication to the continual improvement of qualitative and quantitative disclosure, however uncomfortable this may be in times of underperformance. And I think that's a very important part of corporate behavior that we don't talk about. It's almost inevitable that underperformance will occur at some point in time. And so expecting that line to go ever upwards is imposing pressures on people and on the organization which are unrealistic, particularly if that line going upwards is the share price. We are not salesmen of the company's share price. We are not here to meet the consensus forecasts of analysts. I'm always amused by that. It's kind of like going to a rugby match, guessing the score wrong, and then blaming the players. So I think that these kinds of pressures of lack of process, short-termism, and a lack of custodianship, where managers of large divisions or large companies start to assume an arrogance and an importance where they forget about who owns the company. Unless you own 100% of the company, you're a custodian. and you're there to look after the interests of somebody else, and you have to behave accordingly at all time, hopefully leaving the asset in a better state than you found it.